Hey friends, welcome to the weekly Bible study podcast. My name's Tyson. I am the Greenville campus pastor, and these guys love how I said podcast.
What are you from, New Hampshire?
New Hampshire. Bob, introduce yourself.
I'm Bab. I'm Bob Radank, the South Green campus pastor.
Very good.
My name's Tommy. I'm laughing at Tyson. This was not the first take we had.
Right.
No, it's okay. It's all right. I had too many jokes in the first one. We had to start over. Anyway, we are in Exodus 33 this week, and this is a campus pastor week, so that's why we only have the campus pastors here. Scott's not even in the room. We get to say whatever we want.
Hey, open mic.
And this is going to go out, and he can't stop it. So I'm pretty excited. I mean, even what I've said so far is probably crossing the line, but that's all right. That's all right. This is going to be great. So we've got a mixer before we get into our passage. What did we decide to ask about?
The worst trade that you could imagine.
The worst trade you can imagine.
For example, you have Michael Jordan on your team, but you're going to make a trade for somebody who doesn't even start on another team, and you would say, that's it? There's nothing else with the trade? Right. It's the worst trade you could possibly imagine. So we're each thinking about what is something that you would say, this is the worst trade that you could imagine.
Or maybe a trade that you've experienced.
It doesn't have to be a real life.
No?
I mean, if you got offered a country.
Right.
And for a sandwich.
Yeah.
Would you make that trade?
It depends on the country for sure. If someone offered me like a tiny one that I could manage, then I could probably do that. But
what if it was a really good sandwich?
Well, it depends on how hungry I was. Ukraine, though, I mean, not putting
now
Ukraine
we're going to get flagged
down,
on YouTube.
But just with the whole situation, I probably wouldn't make that trade. Like, that'd be really hard to have to deal with Russia right now.
So a sandwich for a country,
yeah,
that would be a bad trade.
An odd trade anyway.
Yeah, that'd be tough.
What about you, Bob? What kind of trade are you thinking about?
I actually have a personal one that I've experienced. I had a nice truck, beautiful truck, fully loaded, nice sound system.
Let's remember those good days.
It was a good truck, and we used it for the ministry and pulling trailers at South Green, and then we needed to get a new vehicle. And so I sold that truck so that we can get a new one, so that my wife and kids could have a reliable vehicle. And then I took their hand-me-down, and I'm driving in a beat-up old van, and the thing barely runs, and it gets very loud and clunky, and pretty much every time I sit into that van, and I start that van up, and it goes, and it cranks over.
You dream about your truck.
I dream about.
And you're reminded
truck.
of such a poor trade that was.
Right. Yes.
Is this the van that the door sometimes don't
right.
close? And
then every time I try to close that door, because you push the button and it's supposed to close by itself, but it gets all the way there and it goes, nope, I'm not. And then you push it again and nope, I don't want to close. So you have to
There's been a few times where I've pulled into the parking lot, come into the church, and walked by your van with the doors open.
Wide open.
Yeah.
And sometimes when it's raining, it's really irritating and frustrating. So
yeah. All right. So
I miss my truck. Yeah.
Not the best trade.
There would have been times when I would have thought the worst trade, I would have made some kind of joke about how I was not going to trade my iPhone for an Android phone, and that had been funny for a long time. It's not anymore. I'm pretty frustrated at my iPhone. So I was thinking about other trades that I might be offered, and we don't really have a sports team here at FCC, but we do have a lot of different staff, and we have different offices, which kind of feel like different territories. I thought about if I were traded a position where currently we share the office, and all three of our desks are in there in this one office, which I actually think that office itself is the premier office out of all the options available. I happen to also believe that where my desk sits is the preferable spot in our office. So I would think that certainly you all could trade locations with me where your desks are, and that would be a downgrade, but not the worst trade ever, because it's still in a great office. But
you know
if
what
one of
is
the
the
other
worst?
staffers came and said, hey, would you like to, specifically I think about, and I've said this to him, to Travis Chapman, who is our next gen director, I used to be in that spot, and I know that office gets so hot all the time. I don't know why. There's something about it. It's always hot. If he said, hey, you want to trade desks? Absolutely not. There's no chance. It's the worst trade, not doing it.
So if we totally remodeled and shuffled everyone, you would stake your desk down. You'd say, I'm not moving. This is the best place.
I mean, it's concreted down into the building now.
Oh, yeah, your desk is. Yeah.
No, not really.
Oh.
But I do like where it is.
But what is your opinion of the exact spot where your desk is as opposed to where Tyson and I are at? You said some things in our practice run that I was curious if you would share.
You're trying to make me say those things publicly.
Yes, I am, yeah.
Right, they reflect my personality.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah.
And truthfully, you mentioned you wouldn't want to be where I am because I'm the first one that greets people that come in the office,
And
I'm fine with that. I like greeting.
I'm
people.
super introverted.
And you wouldn't want mine because my back is to the window. And I wouldn't want to trade because I like my back being to the window, because if I had to stare out the window, I'd get distracted by all the cars driving by.
Is that why I don't get
I would
anything
never get
done?
any work done.
That's why I don't get anything done.
Ah, that
That's
explains it.
I'm just watching the birds
We
outside.
need some blinds.
So why do we ask this question? Is because in our text, in Exodus chapter 33, it's not so much a trade, but there is a real sense in this passage where we have the response from God on the tail end of the rebellion by the people of making the golden calf. God says, all right, you can still go into the land, the promised land, but I'm not going with you.
Right.
And so as a response, Moses' response to that is functionally saying, that's a terrible trade. I'm not going to trade this land for your presence.
Right.
And so our title for our sermon is
My presence will go with you.
right.
And so hopefully by the end, we will be convinced of the same terrible trade, that we don't need to trade blessing for blessing without God, but that we would seek his presence primarily in our lives. But we're getting the cart before the horse here. So how about we read our passage? And it's a little bit longer of a passage. It's the entire chapter of 33. So what if we break it up? Bob, would you read verses 1 through 6, and then I'll grab 7 through 11, and then do you want to take us home?
I will do so.
All right. Very good. Go ahead.
Exodus 33. The Lord said to Moses, Depart, go up from here, you and the people whom you have brought up out of the land of Egypt, to the land of which I swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, saying, To your offspring I will give it. I will send an angel before you, and I will drive out the Canaanites, and the Amorites, and the Hittites, and the Perizzites, and the Hivites, and the Jebusites. You guys wanted me to read this passage so I could say all those ites.
You did a pretty good job.
I did pretty good. Thank you. Appreciate that. Verse 3, Go up to a land flowing with milk and honey, but I will not go up among you, lest I consume you on the way, for you are a stiff-necked people. When the people heard this disastrous word, they mourned, and no one put on his ornaments. And the Lord said to Moses, Say to the people of Israel, You are a stiff-necked people. If for a single moment I should go up among you, I would consume you. So now take off your ornaments, that I may know what to do with you. Therefore the people of Israel stripped themselves of their ornaments from Mount Horeb onward.
All right, so let's talk about this first section before we move on. One thing that when I was young and I would read this section, it used to feel to me almost like God was reacting, not in a tantrum, but like out of anger and almost being spiteful. But I've grown to kind of see this as a move, a show of grace, because he understands that because of his holiness, if he went with the people, he would destroy them. Their sin would cause them to die in his presence.
Verse 3, lest I consume you on the way.
Yeah.
On the way.
And verse 5, if for a single moment I should go up among you, I would consume you. And so he wants them to live. He doesn't want to consume them. So what else do you guys see in this passage that you want to bring out?
Well, there's a huge recognition that even though he doesn't want to consume them, he is a holy God. He is a just God, and sin has consequences. Mm-hmm. So this is still talking about God's reaction towards Israel's sin when they built the golden calf and worshipped it and declared that golden calf is Jehovah God, and so we see that 3,000 of the Israelites were killed. The Levites killed them. That was part of the judgment, but this is still continuing with that, where God says, I'm not going with you because there's still sin that needs to be dealt with.
Well, he tells them who they are as a people. They're a stiff-necked people.
Yep.
Yeah.
And in response to that stubborn rebellion that they have demonstrated against him, he says to them in verse 3, I will not go with you. He says again in verse 5, tell them, this is who you are. You're a stiff-necked people. So that repetition of who they are leads them to, in verse 4, it says that they began to mourn, recognizing that God was not going to be with them. So they mourn, take off their ornaments, which is probably some form of jewelry, potentially even an amulet or some type of lucky
Spiritual
charm.
good luck
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah, that they were carrying with them. Obviously, they had not used everything they had with them to make the golden calf. They still had some things. And then it says there in the end that they did this for the rest, like they never put them back on. Verse 5, they continued to keep those off. So it rattled them. The fact that God said he's not going to go with them, they definitely felt the weight of that.
Another thing that we see about the character of God in this is he's going to keep his promises. Even though he's decided, I need to pull back so that you don't die because of your sin, I'm still going to keep my promises. He says here, which I swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, saying, to your offspring I will give it. And so he understands what he said and what he's promised, and his holiness keeps his character in keeping that promise.
Right. Yeah, so what is he going to give? And he says, I'll still give you the land.
Right.
And this gets, I think probably in some ways way ahead, but when you think about that land as God's promise to them where they will find rest in him, which is going to point towards our rest in Christ ultimately. But as one of the things I like about this is they recognize a land without God's presence is not going to be rest.
That's good. Yeah, that's good. And rest is such a ginormous theme throughout the scriptures, and you see that repeated over and over as you study the idea of God's rest through the scriptures, is that without God and without a relationship with God, they don't have it.
Right.
I was studying just recently through Kings, and I mentioned this to you guys already, but hey, you weren't there, so let me tell you.
Yeah, I was in the office.
It was.
Yeah.
I was studying through Kings and Chronicles the idea of rest, and rest, God's rest is always associated with the good kings who had a good relationship with God, but it's never mentioned with all the evil kings.
Which I think is important in this passage here, that just to point it out for the sake of application within the context of a life group. It is easy for us to think about the physical things being that which matters most. And would we likewise say that's a terrible trade? I'm not going to trade that physical thing, that land, because it comes without your presence.
Yeah.
Would we do that? We can easily become too fixated on a circumstantial change when it's really something in our hearts that needs to change.
Yeah, just to skip ahead and cheat a little bit, if we jump down to verse 16, it says, the second half of the verse, is it not in your going with us so that we are distinct, I and your people, from every other people on the face of the earth? It's God's presence that makes them different.
Yeah.
And will, of course, form them into.
Now, this podcast is coming off the heels of when I preached in Hebrews chapter 3 and talking about the rest and that we find in Christ, that God has prepared that rest for us, and so the promised land wasn't a place of rest because it was a land of prosperity, a land, something that they could have. That was a place of rest because God was with them,
Right.
and that fellowship that they could have with God as He's leading them through that, and that is the true rest. That's what they wanted. That's why they're mourning, because they're realizing that God's not going to be with us. He's going to give us what He promised. He's going to give us this thing that has substance, but we need Him. in the midst of it. And Moses, of course, as we'll see as we go through this, he's longing for that. He's saying, God, we need this. And you just read that in verse 16, that it's not going to matter if we don't have you with us.
Right. So it's good that they discover that if they understand this, that they need the Lord. So let me pick it up on unless you guys have anything left to say this section.
Nope, go on.
All right, let me read our next section. Verse 7. Now Moses used to take the tent and pitch it outside the camp, far off from the camp, and he called it the tent of meeting. And everyone who sought the Lord would go out to the tent of meeting, which was outside the camp. Whenever Moses went out to the tent, all the people would rise up, and each would stand at his door and watch Moses until he had gone into the tent. When Moses entered the tent, the pillar of cloud would descend and stand at the entrance of the tent, and the Lord would speak with Moses. And when all the people saw the pillar of cloud standing at the entrance of the tent, all the people would rise up and worship, each at his tent door. Thus the Lord used to speak to Moses face to face, as a man speaks to his friend. When Moses turned again into the camp, his assistant Joshua, the son of Nun, a young man, would not depart from the tent. So what tent is this? At first, because the tabernacle is also called the tent of meeting, you might think it's the same, but you were doing a little digging into this.
Yeah,
right?
Most of the commentators on this will see that that's not the case, that this would be a different tent, that the tabernacle, at least chronologically, had not been constructed yet. The instructions had been given.
Right.
But there was a tent of meeting where Moses did meet with the Lord. It was a smaller tent outside of the camp. And that eventually the tent of meeting is referred to with the tabernacle, specifically that the Holy of Holies has God's presence. And that becomes important for how we would understand why this falls where it does within this chapter and within the greater narrative that's going on, because we were talking about the importance of the presence of God. And so a couple cool things to notice in what we just read is that it reminds us that the process of this would be when Moses goes out to the tent, it says in verse 8, all the people would rise up, and then they would just stand and watch. And what would they watch? They would watch the pillar of cloud representing and God's presence, so they could see and know that's the presence of God, to go to be with Moses. So then when Moses would come and say, here's what's going on, they knew Moses had face-to-face spoken with God.
Right.
And so they could then trust that. And so that the idea that they were aware of God's presence there, and that going through Moses certainly connects to the idea that God says, hey, you all can go on, but I'm just going to send an angel, but I'm not going to go with you.
Yeah.
This change of what that would be. And the contrast then with having already received the instructions for the tabernacle, the question is God not going to be, the tabernacle is to be set up right in the midst of the camp.
Right.
Is he not even going to be with us? Not even on the outskirts, not at all. Is he not going to be with us?
Yeah, with the instructions for the building of the tabernacle, like the tabernacle was to be right in the middle of the camp, and all the people would set up their individual tents all the way around. Like God was center. But what we see here is that he's far outside the camp, and the people are not near him. God is separate. And so we see another image of this separation between God and the people because of their sin.
Yeah, they had said already, hey, we'll do everything that the Lord commands. This is the covenant that God made with them. We'll do that. And then they violated that. And their violation of that is going to set up the intercessory work for Moses. They cannot, by their own perfect obedience, do what is required. God's holiness not only is not even going to be on the outskirts of camp with them, God says, I'm not going to go with you. So I think there's some cool imagery in what that represents for us in terms of the necessary intercessory work of Moses, which we're going to see in the next section for sure, but specifically the presence of God.
And verse 11 sets up this intercessory work because we see the relationship that God had with Moses.
Yeah.
I just like how it's written, that it says that they would speak face to face as a man speaks to his friend.
Yeah.
And so this was a close relationship that they had, which helps us understand, which we're about to read, starting in verse 12. It helps us understand this intercessory work, how that was possible, because Moses had favor with God. And so.
Yeah, and then we see Joshua mentioned there at the end, which just if you know the rest of the story, you know he becomes important. And so even here he's mentioned, which probably as we get to the point where Joshua begins to take the lead, we'll probably reference this verse right here.
Yeah. That's something that a lot of people miss. At least let me speak for myself. I missed for a long time was how intimately involved Joshua was throughout this. Joshua, earlier we saw he's up on the mountain with Moses. Mm-hmm. He's here in the tent of meeting with Moses. And so he wasn't just they sent out several spies to go and check out the promised land later in the story here. And Joshua comes back saying, let's do this, because he's got faith in God. Was it him and Caleb? Mm-hmm. All right. So I always thought, okay, that's why he takes on the leadership after Moses, because he was the faithful spy. But no, he was involved through all of this, being mentored by Moses and having a very similar intimate connection with God.
Yep.
Yeah. Anything left in this section here, or shall we move on?
I think we can move on.
Verse 12, Moses said to the Lord, "See, you say to me, bring up this people, but you have not let me know whom you will send with me. Yet you have said, I know you by name, and you have also found favor in my sight. Now therefore, if I have found favor in your sight, please show me now your ways, that I may know you in order to find favor in your sight. Consider too that this nation is your people." And he said, "My presence will go with you, and I will give you rest." And he said to him, "If your presence will not go with me, do not bring us up from here. For how shall it be known that I have found favor in your sight, I and your people? Is it not with your going with us, so that we are distinct, I and your people, from every other people on the face of the earth?" And the Lord said to Moses, "This very thing that you have spoken, I will do, for you have found favor in my sight, and I know you by name." Moses said, "Please, show me your glory." And he said, "I will make all my goodness pass before you, and will proclaim before you my name, the Lord. And I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious, and will show mercy on whom I will show mercy." But he said, "You cannot see my face, for man shall not see me and live." And the Lord said, "Behold, there is a place by me where you shall stand on the rock. And while my glory passes by, I will put you in a cleft of the rock, and I will cover you with my hand until I have passed by. Then I will take away my hand, and you shall see my back, but my face shall not be seen."
Do you guys detect this face theme in our passage? So many faces. The face of God shall see or shall not see. Moses talks with God face to face. And then one that's a little bit more hidden is in verse 14, and he said, "My presence will go with you." That Hebrew word there is face. My face will go with you. Isn't that interesting?
It is. And I think it's interesting, especially within the context of idolatry, where the people will be commanded to not form an idol, because when God spoke to them, when he allowed them to hear his words coming out of the cloud on the mountain, Moses says to them, "You saw no form." Mm-hmm. And so they would be tempted to think about face. So we know that face here is not something that is about God's particular
physical
form.
Right.
So then what are we going to learn here by face? Well, what is, I think a very easy thing would do, and you could try this in your life groups as you're discussing this, is to try and talk to one another, but don't face each other.
That'd be so weird.
Isn't it, though?
I'm going to reject your suggestion right now. I will not do that.
I feel that way a little bit on the podcast. We've decided that we're going to try and face the camera a little bit, but I don't face you as much. So it does often for me, just sitting here, insider tip, feel a bit awkward as I don't face you.
Sure.
But I'm speaking to you.
Right.
And so I will turn towards you.
I feel the same,
but
when
then
I'm
away
over there
from the people. We recognize that in order to feel connected, we're going to face the camera, or face you. And that is mindful even in the way that we position this. So I think that's more of what's going on here, but I think it's a little bit deeper, which is probably what you were indicating, right?
Yeah, I'm just saying this is very neat to see this continuous theme of face, and Moses meets with him face to face. He says, my presence or my face will go with you, meaning this relationship won't stop. Like when God changes his mind here, he says, all right, we'll keep doing this face-to-face intimate relationship. I'm coming along. But enough about the face. What else do we see in this passage that we can talk about and bring out to the surface here, guys?
I see Moses' persistence. He almost seems like, maybe this is wrong, but he almost seems like one of my kids. Like they ask for something, and I'll say, yeah, we can do that. And then 5 minutes later, they're asking, can we do that? Are we really going to do that? When are we going to do that? Are you going to? Mm-hmm. I kind of get that feeling here with Moses, that he asks, hey, I want your presence. I want you to be with us. I want you to go with us. And what is it in verse 14? God says that my presence will go with you, and I will give you rest. And then starting in verse 15, Moses is like, are you sure? Are you sure that you're present? Are you really going to do what you say that you're going to do? And what's wonderful to see is that you talked about this in our prep time, that God doesn't rebuke Moses at all. Like he doesn't say anything. He
doesn't try to argue back.
He doesn't argue back. He understands, and he answers the question. He says, yes, I will do it. Yes, I will do it.
Yeah, you can see Moses says, you've got to come with us. And God doesn't argue back at all as soon as that intercession begins. As soon as Moses steps up and says, I'm going to talk to you on behalf of the people, God says, okay, I'll go.
Because what is Moses fixated on? He's fixated on God's glory.
Yes.
And so we can try and think about what that is, and we can put ourselves in that position. What's really hard for us is what I think is challenging for us, I should say, is am I fixated on the glory of the Lord when I would make such a request of him? So why does God not respond back in a way that would confront Moses' request? Because Moses' request is fixated on the glory of the Lord. And his request to see that in verse 17 is not a request for some personal, holy experience of his own. It is in light of, in context of, the covenant that God has with his people. And so that covenant was first confirmed on Mount Sinai, where God did show his glory. He let the people see his glory. He revealed that to them as a way of saying, this is my covenant with you. And so as Moses is asking for this again in verse 17, as we would turn into the next chapters afterward, it's because he's about to renew that covenant again with them. And so Moses says, hey, how are we going to do this? How are we going to be distinct if not by your presence with us? Would you demonstrate that?
Yeah, which is glory of God.
Yeah.
I used to understand this as almost like Moses was changing subjects. Okay, God, we've got that figured out. You're coming with us. Now something different. I just had a thought. Can I see you? Can I get a glimpse of you? But even just us talking about this passage together, I've come to understand he's not changing subjects. Right. He is saying, you coming with us, not consuming the people, and being our God is you revealing your glory to us. And it makes the passage make more sense to me.
And the word that we see repeated in this section is you have found favor in my sight, or have I found favor in your sight. That word favor is grace. It's a synonym for grace.
Yeah.
And so that's what Moses is asking for. That's what God is confirming when he says that I will show favor, or I'll be gracious to whom I'll be gracious, and will show mercy to whom I will show mercy. This is God confirming that he is sovereign and he will do this, and Moses is asking for that and longing for that. But like you said, Tommy, not for a personal gain or anything, but it's for the people. It's for this great work that God has given the people to do, of being his people and being the chosen people who would then conquer that land and enter into that land of rest,
Yeah, and it's not to say that there's particularly anything wrong with a desire to be in the presence of God. There's nothing wrong with that. But there can be. And a lot of times when we hear this chapter in Scripture preached, when maybe the familiar part for you is this part, and you're like, oh, I've heard that before. It can often be preached in a way that we are trying to mimic what Moses has done by having a personal, special experience in a way that pulls it out of the context of what's going on here in the chapter.
Right.
And I think leads us to do something that is not God-focused, but me-focused. And it's easy to take something that could be a right desire and a good desire and make it self-centered in a way that would lead us apart or away from what this text as a whole is teaching us and pointing out.
So then turning to application,
Yeah.
what do we do with this? How should we approach this passage in a practical sense with our relationship with Christ, with our relationship with God? What say you?
Well, I think the favor that we have, that we receive in salvation through Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ is our mediator. Moses was the mediator, a picture of Christ. This favor that we receive is not just for us, but it's for us to do a work of making God's glory known so that others could participate in this grace and experience this grace. And
Similarly to how Moses said, he didn't agree, like, okay, God, it's just me and you.
right.
But he interceded on the people.
Right.
So that-
when God said, "Hey, I'll wipe them all out, and then I can start it all over with and make a family out of you."
Right.
And Moses said, "No. That would completely mess. Not he didn't say mess up, but he was talking about like how the reputation of the Egyptians and all these other nations. What would they think of that?" And so he was speaking on behalf of the people. And we're not intercessors. We're not Christ in any way, but the work that God has done in our lives should flow out and affect other people's lives as well.
Yeah.
And I think I think you hit it on the head there, Tommy, talking about how it's not wrong to seek this for ourselves, but I really liked how you said that. If we could rewind that, maybe I'll go back and listen to it.
Just go ahead and do that right now.
And it was a great way to say that because we're so about us and what can I gain from this? And Moses isn't doing that here. He does say, "Show me your glory," but he had a greater thing in mind, and it was for the people to intercede on their behalf, and so that God's glory can be known throughout the whole people and throughout the land that they were
Good.
promised. So yeah.
Good.
Yeah, and we look into the New Testament and we recognize that God has chosen his people, and his people are identified and marked in such a way that they are set apart. And so Romans chapter 9 talks about God's choice in this and so in verse 15 it quotes and pulls from our passage here in Exodus where it says, "For he says, I have mercy on whom I have mercy, I have compassion on whom I have compassion." Verse 16, "So then it depends not on human will or exertion, but on God who has mercy." And so we think about how the New Testament takes this truth and this reality that God is speaking here to Moses, and he says, I'm not doing this because you can keep a covenant perfectly. I keep the covenant. And I'm going to ensure that that's the case. And in order to do that, I'm going to set you up as one who intercedes for the people. And so then we think about what does the New Testament say about that is Christ is our intercessor between us and God. Hebrews chapter 7 is talking about the priesthood of Christ, a better priesthood, and it says, consequently, talking about Jesus, he is able to save to the uttermost those who draw near to God through him, since he always lives to make intercession for them. And so we have a high priest that is better than any of the priests of the Old Testament. We have Jesus Christ who intercedes on our behalf. The author of Hebrews makes the argument that as great as Moses was and as wonderful as we talk about his heart here in this passage for the people, that Christ is better, that he is an intercessor that is able to make intercession for us. So
to bring that back and connect back to our opener, our what do we call that thing?
Mixer.
Icebreaker, our mixer. For us to see Jesus, for us to see our relationship with him as like, hey, just get us salvation, but I'm going to go ahead and trade that for a life where I'm just doing my own thing, is a bad trade. But we need to, just like the people, just like Moses specifically recognized, we do not need the promised land without God, because that's a bad trade. We need the presence of God before anything else. We need a relationship with Christ. We need the reconciliation to God the Father that he gives us more than anything as our perfect intercessor.
And I think that's a great way to think about it, because a piercing question that I would ask, that if I had the option to trade for a life that was free of tears, I had all the money I wanted, had all the food I wanted, any car I could drive, if I had all of this, these resources available, but I did not have the Lord, would I trade it? One of the ways to ask our mixer question was, if you won a all expense paid trip somewhere, but you had to take it alone, and especially for us men here who are married, you would say, oh, man, like I want to enjoy that with my spouse.
Right.
And so you think about what that is. So often we are tempted to say, Lord, if you'll just do this for me, I'll do anything. And we're fixated on the thing,
Right.
rather than the one that we would have his
Yep.
presence with us, that matters more than the thing.
Yep. That's good.
All right, guys, let's go ahead and end in prayer. Thanks for joining us. And Bob, how about you pray for us?
Sure. God, we thank you for the presence that we can have with you, not because of something that we've done, but because of what Jesus has done. And I pray that we can consider him. He's far greater than anything that we can ever have or anything imagine. And I pray that we as a church and as these life groups listen to this podcast, I pray that their eyes and hearts and minds will be fixed on you, dear Jesus. And as you guide and direct, as we grow in your word. And we love you and I pray these things in your name. Amen.
Amen. All right, don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell. Oh, wait,
Listen.
this isn't YouTube.